Hi, and thank you very much for joining me today for this opening keynote presentation at the GDA Capital Global Family Office Summit. My name is Alex Tapscott. I'm the managing director of the digital asset group at Ninepoint Partners, co-founder of the Blockchain Research Institute, and co-author of the new book, Digital Asset Revolution, which is available now, came out on July 12th. I'm very excited to be here with you all today because this is a very exciting time in human history. And that's because we are on the brink of a new digital age and potentially a new era of the internet altogether. So let me explain what I mean by that. The first era of the digital age brought us, well, the computer, and with it, the PC, the internet, mobile telephony, the cloud, and so forth. And now we're entering this new period in human development where technology is becoming more and more integrated into our lives, into our businesses, really into the fabric of everything about being a human being, whether it's virtual reality and augmented reality, new forms of energy technology, drones and robotics, or potentially even the Internet of Things. But there's one technology in particular that's having a greater impact than any other. And it's the technology that enables cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and it's called blockchain. My belief that blockchain is the most important technology of this new digital age and is potentially ushering in a new era of the internet that I think is going to change the world in some pretty profound ways, which is what I'd like to talk to you about today. So, when you use the internet today to send and move information, you're not really sending an original, unique thing, an asset, so to speak. You're sending a copy. So, if you think about email, you can send one email to one person and that same email to 1,000 other people. So, if I attach a PDF of this PowerPoint, for example, I can copy it and send it to thousands of individuals. But the internet as a whole kind of functions like that, right? If I launch a website, anybody can read what's on it. Um, if I post something on Twitter or Wikipedia, it's available for all to see. So the first era of the internet, which has had a profoundly positive impact on the world, to be sure, it's really like a printing press for information. And when it comes to most forms of information, that's okay. In fact, it's a really big benefit, right? Like the first era of the printing press, it democratized access to information, changed how we communicate with each other, and so forth. Except when it comes to things that have value, things like money, but also basically any other asset that requires scarcity in order to have any worth, being able to create copies of something is actually a terrible idea. So if instead of sending an email, what I was trying to send was $20, if I can send $20 to one person, but then send the exact same $20 to 1,000 other people in my network, well, then that $20 is worthless. It's not money at all. So it's great to have a printing press for information. It's not so great for us to have a printing press for assets. And so the internet, despite having a really profound impact on so many industries, media, communications, and so forth, actually hasn't had as big an impact on the industries where assets are important, specifically in financial services. And it's not just money, it's any asset, right? If I sell a share of a company, it's important that the buyer knows that they've got the only version of that share certificate, that I can't sell the same share of Apple 1,000 times. If I vote in an election, it's important that my vote is cast and counted correctly, but that I can only vote once, that I can't copy that vote over and over again. It's true for other kinds of assets. If I enter into a contract, it's important that I can't duplicate the terms over and over and over again. So it's great for us to have a printing press for information, not so great for money or for assets. Now, computer scientists have been trying to figure out how to solve this problem for a really long time. It's called the double spend problem, and there have been various attempts to basically create digital scarcity using the internet. But until 2009 or so, they weren't really all that successful. So from 1993 through 2009, and really into the era we're in today, we still largely relied on intermediaries like middlemen, right, to sit in the center of transactions and to perform some important roles. Now, the middlemen of the digital economy, the internet economy, many of them are still the same as they were before. Visa, Mastercard, banks, brokerages, so forth. But increasingly, we're seeing new digital conglomerates like Facebook and Amazon, technology payment providers like PayPal and so forth. And these middlemen perform an essential role in the digital economy, just as they perform an essential role in the regular economy. They establish the identity of parties, they perform all the business logic, clearing, settling, record keeping, and so forth. And most importantly, they create trust. We engage with these platforms because we trust that they are maintaining accurate records and that they're doing a good job. We have had to re-intermediate companies into the internet economy in order to make commerce online work, right? And overall, these intermediaries have done a decent job, but they've got some pretty big limitations. They're centralized, which makes them vulnerable to hacking or to attack. That's true for basically every company in the digital world. They add cost and friction to transactions. They can cost upwards of 9 or 10%, right, to send money between two parties on opposite sides of an international border. I'm very good friends with an entrepreneur in Nigeria who has a lot of business between Nigeria and Ghana, which are right next to each other, sort of like between Quebec and Ontario. And he says that it takes more time and costs more to send money using a wire than it would just to drive that money the 8 hours along a bumpy road to the capital of Ghana. And the reason for that is that the money must first go from Nigeria to New York, then New York to London, and then London to Ghana. So there's this big bustling market for cross-border payments and other forms of cross-border commerce, which is really odd, right? We talk about this market for cross-border payments, but when was the last time anybody sent a cross-border email or a cross-border text message or cross-border tweeted? There's no such thing. Information flows seamlessly. The internet has dropped the cost of information by a millionfold, right? If you wanted to have this same call that we're having right now in 1995, a high definition voice over IP, video over IP phone call with 1,000 participants, you'd have to marshal the computing resources of the NSA to do it, right? Now we can do it basically for free. If you wanted to send money overseas 25 years ago, it basically looked the same as it does today. So for some reason, information changed completely how we move it, how we store it, and so forth. Drop the cost basically to zero. But when it comes to value and assets, things haven't changed, and it's because of the problems I've identified here. And then perhaps the biggest issue, well, maybe two more. One is that middlemen still exclude big parts of the population. There's over a billion people who don't have access to financial services. And then the final thing is that because we deal with these intermediaries online in every single transaction, every single interaction, they're collecting all of this information and data about us. So there's a virtual you out there, but the virtual you is not owned by you. It's owned by Facebook and Amazon and Apple and PayPal and Visa and all of these other intermediaries. And that's problematic because it means while we can't use that information to, enrich and empower ourselves, we know it's valuable. Look at the market capitalization of the biggest companies in the world. They're all big data aggregators, pretty much. But also, it can end up in the wrong hands, right? So, what if the internet was entering a new era from an internet of information to an internet of value? Well, in 2008, 2009, an anonymous person or persons created this thing called Bitcoin. I'm sure people have heard about Bitcoin by now. Bitcoin was designed to do something relatively simple. It was designed to solve that first problem I identified early in the talk, which is how do you move cash peer to peer between two people without the need for an intermediary? How do you solve the double spend problem, which is how do you ensure that when you move money to someone or any asset, that you can't send the same money or asset to someone else, right? Seems like a simple problem, but was actually extremely difficult to solve. And the creators solved it through the implementation of a thing called a blockchain. Now, this will be the only kind of mildly technical part. But remember, I talked about intermediaries and the role that they play as trusted middlemen. Well, one of the reasons that they're trusted is that they maintain records. They have a ledger of all transactions between all different participants, right, in a marketplace. So, who owns what, who owes what to whom, who's indebted to whom, and so on and so forth. And for maintaining this ledger, and every single financial institution has a separate ledger, right? It says separate information that we trust them to maintain. For acting as that trusted third party, they get to reap the benefits of all of the commerce that happens between parties. Now, a blockchain is a ledger, but instead of existing inside of one single institution, like inside of a bank or inside of a government or something, it is decentralized or it is distributed across every node in a peer to peer network. So anybody who wants can see the ledger. The ledger basically says who owns what assets and what transactions are ongoing and what transactions have already occurred and when they occurred and so on and so forth, right? Kind of like the ledger inside of a bank or other financial institution. But the only difference is that everybody can see what's in that ledger, but no single person or actor can alter what's in that ledger without the entire network reaching consensus. So every you know day, every minute, every second on a blockchain network like Bitcoin, transactions are constantly happening. Money is being sent from one party to another, to another, to another. Every so often, those transactions are batched together in a thing called a block. That block is then broadcast to the network. Nodes on the network basically work to validate the transactions that are posted to that block did occur. And once they've all agreed, basically, that those transactions are legit, that block is then added to a chain, which is connected to a prior block and a prior block and a prior block, all the way back to the beginning of commerce on that network. And if you wanted to go back and rewrite a transaction in a block from, say, I don't know, 20 minutes ago or an hour ago, you wouldn't be just moving a number in a spreadsheet like inside of a financial institution. You would actually have to rewrite the whole history of commerce, going all the way back to that transaction. And you'd have to do it while the biggest computing network in the world fights to prevent you from doing it. So blockchains are one of the probably the most resilient and the most future-proof ways that we've ever devised to move and store and record value. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that if it worked for Bitcoin, it could work for other stuff, right? Bitcoin worked so well. Remember, it's got a market cap today of $500 billion, which people think Bitcoin's still sort of an emerging asset. It's worth more than the value of every single Silicon Valley startup that's been founded since Bitcoin was invented, right? So it's a pretty big asset, pretty material, used by over 120 million people, according to the most recent analysis. But the point is that Bitcoin worked so well that it has kind of set off a spark, which has caught on like wildfire and has spread to other areas. And it's got people thinking, well, if we can move and store Bitcoin peer to peer, well, maybe we can move and store other kinds of assets. Could this work for art and collectibles? Could it work for votes and elections? Could it work for other forms of IP? Could we use this for um, stocks and bonds and other financial assets? And if we can move money peer to peer and move assets peer to peer, then what else can we do peer to peer? Can we create peer to peer models for lending, for trading, and for other forms of commerce, right? And that's the promise of Web3. The idea of Web3 basically is that the first era of the internet was the read internet, um, meaning that the internet was primarily a publication medium. You would go to the web, you would read information. Someone took a restaurant menu and put it online, or someone took, an online, like a retail store, put it online, but only where you could sort of interact with the images on the screen. You couldn't actually buy anything. Web 2, the read write web, turned the internet from a publication medium to a communication tool, right? It's social web. So the big businesses of Web 2 would be companies like LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and the like. And these companies help to create the conditions for communities to organize, but they ended up capturing all the value, right? So the value from big networks on Facebook are not owned by the creators, by the users; they're owned by the platforms. What Web3 promises to do is to kind of fulfill the original promise of the web, which is to create a peer-to-peer platform, not only for information, but for information, for assets, for art, for even for identities, so that we can potentially build a more private, more secure, more decentralized internet where big platforms and intermediaries have less control. So I've talked about a few different big themes in this talk, and you're probably at this point, wondering how does this all kind of fit together? And that's a common problem that people face. It reminds me of the analogy of the blind men and the elephant. So there's this story about all these different men, they're blind or blindfolded, and they're touching a different part of the elephant, right? So one person's touching the tail and says, "This feels like a rope," and the other one's touching the leg and says, "This feels like a tree trunk," and the other one's touching the tusks and says, "It feels like something else altogether." And that's kind of how people look at the world of crypto, period, which is that, is this money? Is this something else? Is it a commodity? Are these assets? Are they securities? Or is this a technology platform that could, allow us to rethink different kinds of models for doing stuff, how we organize, how we build companies, how we create value in the economy. And the fact of the matter is, it's kind of all those things. And what we try to do at Ninepoint and also the Blockchain Research Institute is to kind of help people to see the whole elephant. And that's what I'm going to try and do today. So there's a lot of smart money chasing this sector. 2021 was sort of a kind of blow off top year in a lot of different asset classes. We saw, Nasdaq and a lot of like COVID darling names start to roll over. So I don't know how long this continues, but it is worth pointing out that 2022 VC investment in Web3 or crypto has actually exceeded or is on track to exceed the 2021 number, which is pretty remarkable since 2021 was greater than all other years prior combined. So what is everyone so interested in? Well, the fact is, if this is a new technology platform that allows us to create digital assets, what are those digital assets and what impact are they having on the world, right? I think a lot of people look at the world of crypto and they say, okay, I get the premise of Bitcoin, cash for the internet, seems like a good use case. But what's with all these other coins? Why do you need 6,000 cryptocurrencies when one would surely do? We've got hundreds of fiat currencies, hundreds of currencies issued by countries. That's a system that seems to work terribly. So why do we need all these currencies? It's a valid question. And the key is that these aren't all currencies. In fact, what's happening is that we've got a bit of a case of bad labeling. Every crypto asset or digital asset that comes along gets labeled as a currency when in fact they are one of 9 different kinds of digital assets. And this is a problem that has been challenging for a lot of people to figure out. So I wrote a book about it, another one called Digital Asset Revolution: How Blockchain is Decentralizing Finance and Disrupting Wall Street. The book is includes a preface in the first chapter by me, and then the remainder of the chapters are curated selection of our best pieces out of the Blockchain Research Institute, which until recently have been proprietary to our members. Incidentally, our members include companies like FedEx and Standard Bank of Africa, and Exxon and Coca-Cola and the like, and they pay 6 figures to join the institute, and now it's all free, or at least it's $25 if you buy a copy of this book on Amazon. So one of the industries that I think is at risk of the greatest disruption is financial services. Unsurprisingly, I think, given we're talking about a technology that enables digital assets and peer-to-peer models for moving value, obviously. And the industry is kind of ripe for change. This is, if anyone's sort of looking at this and nodding knowingly, this is an image of a Rube Goldberg machine. And a Rube Goldberg machine is this device that performs, a bunch of convoluted steps in order to solve a simple problem, like cracking an egg, or in this case, turning on a light bulb. Well, this is kind of how the financial industry works. Not by design. It's not like we designed it to be complicated to begin with. But the industry is layers upon layers of old technology that has been jerry rigged and refitted and reformatted to work for today. So when you go tap your card on the card reader at Starbucks, or the iPad at the local food court or something, you may think that the money is moving from your wallet or bank account, whatever, to the merchant instantaneously by this digital transaction. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that it's going through, 5 or 6 intermediaries. There's your bank, there's the acquiring bank for the merchant, there's a payment processor, there's user risk check. If you're overseas, there's some kind of FX charge, which could be another intermediary. And that's why the whole thing doesn't take seconds, it takes days. And it costs an interchange fee of 1 to 10%, depending on the kind of merchant. I mean, if you think about it, I think everyone here is pretty familiar with stock trading, right? Remember, I spoke earlier about how the cost of information has declined, a millionfold between the 80s and today, right? Um, Probably not so. Some people on this call remember making long distance phone calls. Remember that from a hotel room, and it costing $3 or $4 per minute to make a phone call. I mean, the concept today is kind of ridiculous. But with value, things haven't changed. So when you sell a share, you might think, the buyer's got the stock now. Well, no. I mean, it takes T plus 3 to settle that trade. You've got brokers, you've got clearinghouses, custodians, transfer agents, exchanges, you name it. all with a piece of that transaction. With crypto assets, with digital assets, there is no difference between clearing and settling. The whole process is instantaneous. It is one atomic transaction, as they say. So there's a lot of talk about DeFi and fintech. So I'm going to just sort of define this quickly. Um, Fintech and decentralized finance, DeFi, is the thing that's used to describe how crypto assets and Web3 is being applied to finance, right? So that's sort of a shorthand for you. A lot of people think of DeFi as some sort of subset of fintech. And it isn't. Though today fintech probably is bigger in terms of market value than DeFi as a whole. But I think ultimately DeFi will come to eclipse fintech. And here's the reason why. Most fintech innovation, whether it's robo advisors or payment processors and the like, are trying to create a better user experience and user interface to interact with the old world of financial services. So they're sort of like digital wallpaper. They are painting over this old edifice of this industry and making it like a little easier, a little cleaner, a little simpler to use and to look at and make it more appealing, which is an innovation to be sure, and I think is had a lot of created a lot of value. But fundamentally, the industry as a whole hasn't changed. What DeFi is trying to do is something more ambitious. It is trying to reimagine uh, the functions of the industry. So what does the industry really do? Lending, trading, moving money, storing money, reimagining all those functions in a completely different way, that it doesn't involve any banks or any other old traditional financial firms, and it basically a peer-to-peer financial industry. And one of the ways it does it is through the use of this thing called the smart contract. So if you think about a Bitcoin transaction, party A wants to send party B some Bitcoin. Party A sends to the address, and after 10 minutes or something, the block gets added to the blockchain. That money ends up in the other person. That is a pretty dumb transaction in a good way, right? It's a simple thing, but lots of transactions in financial services uh, require a little bit more complexity. I want to sell X stock at this limit price, good deal, good till canceled, or good for 30 days. Well, those are terms that have to be programmed into a contract, right? Now, in traditional financial services, the intermediary, the bank or broker, manages all of that, business logic. A smart contract basically just puts all of that into code, so that if and when that price trigger is hit, it automatically executes a trade between two parties. And it doesn't involve a bank, a brokerage, an intermediary of any kind, a payment processor, clearinghouse custodian. It all happens on chain, meaning it happens on one of these networks. And that can be applied. I mean, that example was a simple, limit uh, stock trade, but that can be applied to basically any kind of transaction, any kind of contract in the world. So, what are the kind of key things that the industry does and what could be disrupted? Well, there's a lot of talk in this industry about what are called primitives, which is kind of a arcane computer science term, which some people may be familiar with, to describe building blocks of something. Well, I like to look at the industry in more simple terms, just in terms of functions. What does the industry really do? Well, the financial industry does nine things. Maybe it does a few more, but these are the big ones: storing money, moving money, lending money, creating conditions to fund and invest in new enterprises, right? Connecting capital with risk, risk capital with new opportunities. Exchanging of value, whether it's stock, bonds, derivatives, and so forth. Ensuring value and managing against risk. Analyzing value, right? The role of investment banks and analytics firms and so forth. Accounting, so we can organize financial information into digestible format. And identity. Identity is sort of the big one. You can't do finance without KYC, AML, know your customer, anti-money laundering. You can't be a customer of a bank if the bank doesn't know who you are, right? Sort of something we take for granted. Every single one of these functions of the industry is being transformed by digital assets and by this technology. So I want to just walk through these somewhat quickly, just conscious of time here, because I think it's worth spending a moment on. So, number one, cryptocurrencies, digital money. Bitcoin was designed to be cash for the internet, final settlement layer for the digital economy, and it's treated by some investors in parts of the world as a savings tool. Um, in places like the Middle East and Africa, in Eastern Europe and India and South America, basically outside of Canada, the U.S., Western Europe, Australia, and a few other places, um, being able to store value in a way that isn't inflated away by an unstable currency or expropriated by a corrupt government is actually kind of a difficult thing to figure out. And so Bitcoin has found real product market fit. So if you look at Bitcoin adoption, um, crypto adoption, by the way, last year increased about 1,000%, so 10x. If you look at Bitcoin adoption, it's mostly in places like Venezuela, Nigeria, Ukraine, right? It's not necessarily in Toronto, Canada, though it's interestingly Canadians love crypto. But Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are only one of these 9 different types. So the second category are things called protocol tokens or platform tokens. So no doubt people have heard of Ethereum, I think. And if you haven't, it'd be worth spending some time looking into it. Ethereum is the most successful commercial thing that's ever been created in Canada. It was created by a group of Canadians led by a 19-year-old computer programmer named Vitalik Buterin. It is worth 3 times what Shopify is worth, and it's worth more than RBC's market cap. And I think some people haven't really heard of it, and not everyone is aware of the impact that it's having in the world. Well, what is the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is designed to be money for the internet, a way to move value peer to peer. Ethereum is more like an operating system. It's more like a platform. So think of the Apple App Store. Um, you can build and run applications and smart contracts on top of this thing called Ethereum. So the more applications that get built on Ethereum, the more valuable that platform becomes. Sort of like how the more apps that are built in the Apple App Store, the more valuable Apple becomes. But instead of a 30% flat fee that goes to Apple and 50% for in app purchases, the way Ethereum accrues value is that in order to run applications on the network, you need to pay for transactions using the native token, using ETH. So think of it, and that's why it's called gas. So if you think about the network as a big city grid, and all of these applications and users as people inside of cars, and the cars are driving around the grid. Well, the more cars there are, the more people want to drive in them. The more gas you need, the more valuable the gas becomes, and that's why Ethereum has become a project that's worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So another form of token or digital asset is called a governance token. So the governance tokens are the tokens that are the tokens of the applications that run on platforms like Ethereum. They could be art and NFT platforms. They could be DeFi projects. But the key thing is that their tokens both have utility inside of the application, but also accrue value, sort of like shares in a company, right? So if you own the tokens of one of these platforms, you can earn these tokens by being an early user of a network. But as that network becomes more widely used, the value of those tokens increases. Not only that, they're called governance tokens because you can use them to vote on matters that are sort of relevant to this project, kind of like a company. If you're a shareholder of a business, you might have certain rights as a shareholder, which allow you to vote on certain matters. And just as many different companies have different rules around shareholder participation, different DAOs or organizations have different rules on how to do governance, and that's an area that's growing really, really quickly. Some of these projects, because they have a model where they generate revenue, are actually quite valuable. Uniswap has the biggest treasury of over $2 billion US of both its native token and other digital assets. The fourth kind of digital asset is an NFT, or non-fungible tokens. So if you think about, dollar bills, right? US dollars, Canadian dollars, or Bitcoins, they're interchangeable. It doesn't really matter whether you have this dollar or the next dollar. A dollar is a dollar. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin. The same is not true for NFTs. NFTs are unique, provably scarce assets. So you can't trade, a Wayne Gretzky rookie card and a LeBron James rookie card might both be valuable, but they're not fungible. They're totally different assets, right? And a piece of art might be different from another piece of art. A piece of intellectual property might be different from another piece of intellectual property. So NFTs are basically a standard, a technology standard that allows you to create non-replicable versions of a digital asset. So basically, unique assets. So there's lots of different examples that I've just described, art, collectibles, and so forth. But what's really interesting is how NFTs are being used as a key building block for digital identity. So a LeBron James rookie card might be unique, but another thing that's unique is your digital identity. And imagine being able to own that and to be able to take it with you online rather than it being owned by all those different platforms that I described. NFTs, volumes are down relative to their absolute peak, which is in sort of Jan Feb of this year. But relative to where they were, we're still talking billions of dollars of dollar volume. Another form of token, which is kind of similar to a governance token, is a thing called an exchange token. Basically, you can think of them as a hybrid between a loyalty point and a share, like equity. They're the tokens that are native to exchanges like Binance and FTX, and they provide rewards and discounts and help to create liquidity incentives and whatever to use this exchange. Sort of like imagine this is a bad analogy, but like a Chuck E. Cheese token that can be used inside of an environment to get access to different goods and services. But they also, in some cases, uh, accrue value the way equity does, and in certain instances, they're quite large. Like Binance's native token, I think it's about 50 billion now, not 70, but still 50 billion. It's twice the size of Nasdaq's market cap. Another category, we're almost through this taxonomy, I promise. Another another category, a thing called securities tokens. So securities are things like stocks and bonds, derivatives and the like. And in the same way that we can use blockchains as a way to move Bitcoin, Ether, governance tokens, NFTs, peer to peer instantly without any friction, really, um, and without any form of like formal identity or bank account. We can use the same basic concept to improve on how securities markets work. So, as I mentioned, clearing and settling on blockchains is one function. There is no T plus three; it's all T plus zero or T plus nil. It's instantaneous. Um, and so we can apply that to all sorts of different kinds of assets where today traditional processes take a lot of time. And there's lots of different examples of this. Some legacy companies and organizations, Santander, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, the World Bank, have kind of toyed around with this, but really, unsurprisingly, a lot of the innovation is actually happening on the frontier, like in the world of crypto innovation, where sort of digitally native securities, like the units of an investment fund that goes out and seeks out opportunities. That's basically a security. Something like that is seeing a lot more growth. One that I'd love to spend a lot of time on, we'll try to do my best here, stable coins, because they've been in the news recently. So, for those who are not aware, stable coins are digital assets that are pegged to some other asset in the real world. Almost always the US dollar. About 99% of stablecoin value is US dollar pegged. There are a couple of different kinds of stablecoins, though, and that's the key thing. The biggest share, so about I'd say 70% of all stablecoin volume or value, is in two stablecoins, USDC and USDT. And these are centralized, meaning that they are backed dollar for dollar by collateral that sits inside of a financial institution, right? Like a money market fund. So USDC, for example, is an American company. It posts an audited report of its collateral periodically, and people have a high degree of confidence. So, what are these used for? Well, you can use stable coins to buy crypto assets, obviously. You can use stable coins to keep money stable in dollars, if you're trading. But increasingly, stable coins are being used as a way to move money around the world, just much simpler and faster. There are a lot of companies in the crypto space that make payroll in stable coins. There are a lot of people in parts of the world would prefer to get a US dollar stable coin than their local currency. And that's why we're seeing growth in so many different markets. So there's clearly a big product market fit for stable coins. A second category of stable coins are decentralized, over collateralized, or fully collateralized. So there's a one called DAI. And basically, the way it works is if you want to mint a new coin, create a new stable coin, then you need to deposit at least $1 worth of collateral in the smart contract in the platform. So at any point in time, there's always at least $1 of crypto assets backing up $1 of DAI. The final category are a thing called algorithmic stablecoins or under collateralized. And these are the ones that you read about in the news that haven't really worked out. And that's because, like a bank, which is under collateralized, right? If there's a run on the bank, they may not have enough cash to satisfy all the redemptions. And that's what happened with UST. So if you look at this very fascinating chart, you'll see the amazing growth of the stablecoin market, but you'll also see right towards the tail end here the instant collapse of that top one, which is UST. That was an algorithmic stablecoin that did not work. The last two categories, natural asset tokens, which are digital assets that are backed by um, some asset in the real world, and central bank digital currencies, which are, what they sound like, crypto or digital assets issued by central banks, are probably the two least developed, but maybe two that have the most potential. So natural asset tokens, the area that I think is really interesting, is there are a dozen or more projects looking to use um, this technology to create scarcity in carbon credits and other sort of carbon tokens as a way to sort of massively scale the offset market, which is kind of neat, needs more development. And then this category of central bank digital currencies is happening mostly in China, where they've introduced this digital yuan, which hasn't had a huge amount of uptake, but the government is really pushing because a digital dollar, digital currency in China would allow them to extend the surveillance state into everyday transactions. You could basically suspend someone's money so that they can't spend money if they decide to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So, what does this mean for the world of finance today? If you're calling in and you work in a big bank, you might think, okay, well, am I screwed, or is this all sort of, a whole lot of hype? Um, and I think the best way to think about it is to look at this as a spectrum. So there are lots of ways in which I think banks and other financial firms will be disintermediated. I think it's only a matter of time before many functions of the industry become digital, just like how many functions of how we consume content or how we communicate became digital with the internet, right? It's not that crazy to imagine. But there's also opportunities for re-intermediation or ways to create, to put yourself back in the mix and create value. Things that banks can do. Well, digital asset custody, the $1 trillion industry. That's why US Bank and BNY Mellon are interested in this. Stable coins. What better firm with a better trusted reputation than a large bank to create and issue its own stable coins? I'm shocked Canadian banks haven't thought about this yet. Digital wallets. If people and consumers are going to custody and own crypto assets more and more, why not give them those tool sets rather than having them rely on these third parties, and so on and so forth. There's lots of other sort of ways to look at this. So not everyone agrees, of course. Warren Buffett says cryptocurrencies will come to a bad ending. So he is a big fan of sort of blockchain in general, for whatever that's worth. But what's interesting about Buffett's comments is that they reflect a long tradition of leaders of the old paradigm, and some of them brilliant people, um, as we can see from this slide. Basically, having a hard time embracing the new, right? They react with criticism or with sarcasm or hostility, and that's been true throughout every sort of era of computer science innovation. So, computer science innovation is a funny thing. And I like to use this analogy to describe what's going on. So there's an old story about the invention of chess, and it goes something like this. The king of the land is so delighted with this amazing invention, that he asks the creator, this clever man in the court, to um, to basically tell him what he wants as a gift. Any gift, whatever your heart desires. And the creator says, I'm a humble servant of your majesty. All I want is some rice to feed my family. But I want you to give it to me in the following way: 1 grain on the first piece of the chessboard, 2 grains on the second, 4 grains on the third, 8 grains on the fourth, and, so on and so forth. And the king, who, must be a great leader, but I gather he's not like a math guy. He's like, yeah, sure, whatever. How much rice could that be? A bag of rice, maybe a barrel or something. Humble request. But 8 becomes 16, becomes 32, becomes 64, and so on and so forth. So that by halfway through the chessboard, it's actually more rice than the entire kingdom produces in a whole year. And by the end of the chessboard, it's enough rice to cover the whole planet in 6 feet of rice. So there's a corollary or a side to that story where the king gets very irritated with this guy and chops his head off. That's not the lesson of the story. The lesson of the story is to understand the power of exponential growth. I think that probably the first era of the digital age, the thing that brought us up to the present moment, took us to about halfway through the chessboard. The world today is unrecognizable from what it was, 50 years ago, certainly. So just imagine what that next period looks like. Now, I think it's going to create a lot of dislocation and disruption. I think a lot of people, who are in old industries might find themselves having to reinvent themselves or rethink their businesses. But with every era of, every technology paradigm that changes, there's also huge opportunities for investors. I've approached this talk as the co-founder of the Blockchain Research Institute. If you'd like to follow us, please do on Twitter at BlockchainRI, and also follow me at Alex Tapscott. But also check out the Ninepoint Digital Asset Group at Ninepoint DAG and digital.ninepoint.com. If you'd also like to learn more about some of the investment products and solutions that we're creating in this space. So thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the event. Take care.